lights inside Lakewood Church were blinding, polished, perfect, and overwhelming. Every camera was positioned, every usher briefed, every seat carefully assigned. Television preacher Kenneth Copeland stood behind the scenes, smiling calmly, his signature charisma radiating like he was already mid-sermon. The event had been built as a faith and freedom forum meant to bridge the gap between spiritual leaders and civic voices. But no one expected American pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen to show up. He wasn't on the guest list, yet here he was, confident and clutching a worn leather-bound Constitution in his right hand. When he'd first received the unofficial invitation from a staffer sympathetic to his cause, he hadn't hesitated, not because he craved the spotlight, but because he had one message: truth is not for sale. As Kenneth entered from stage left to polite applause, American pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen stood near the third row, eyes locked on him. He noted everything: the designer suit, the scripted greeting, the grinning televangelist ease. It felt less like a church and more like a production. Kenneth spoke in soft crescendos. "We are so honored tonight to welcome leaders from all walks of life, political, spiritual, and cultural. We are all here in unity." Joel's jaw clenched. Unity. He remembered the video. Kenneth's silent nod when a donor offered a $5 million pledge for a seat at the ministry table. He remembered the tax-exempt empire, the private jets, the half-hearted defense of free speech when churches were shuttered during the pandemic. This wasn't unity, it was theater. A seat was finally offered to him by a hesitant volunteer. He didn't take it. Instead, he stayed standing right by the aisle. His very presence caused a ripple. Phones rose, eyes darted, security whispered. Kenneth continued, unaware. Faith gives us the courage to stand firm even when the world pushes back. That's what I call champion living. American pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen stepped forward, voice low but firm. "Then why do you run your church like a corporation?" The room froze, gasps audible. Kenneth turned, smile twitching. "Excuse me." Joel raised the Constitution. "Faith doesn't need million-dollar deals. The gospel isn't for sale. And the First Amendment protects the truth even when it's uncomfortable." Silence, then murmurs, then someone clapped. Just once. Kenneth motioned for calm, but it was too late. The moment had fractured. This wasn't just a theological forum anymore. It was a reckoning. American pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen wasn't going to be another polite conservative who posed for a photo and left with the donation envelope. He had a statement to make, and it had just begun. The silence after Joel's words wasn't ordinary. It was electric, charged with confusion, discomfort, and something Kenneth hadn't felt in a long time: challenge. Television preacher Kenneth Copeland's fingers tightened suddenly around the microphone. His televangelist persona flickered for a moment, and in its place appeared the businessman behind the gospel. "We welcome all voices here," Kenneth said smoothly. "But let's maintain the spirit of unity." Joel didn't flinch. Unity without truth is just compliance. That landed hard. The audience, composed of donors, local politicians, and hand-picked faith leaders, began to shift in their seats. A few looked to the exits, others curiously leaned in. One man, gray suit, gold ring, whispered, "Is that the pastor from that ministry?" He was, and he hadn't come to blend in. American pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen stepped toward the front. "You say faith gives us courage, but when churches were told to shut down during lockdowns, you stayed quiet. When speech was censored, you said nothing. Where was your courage then?" Kenneth tried to smile. "Pastor Osteen, I think we've owed firm. You think truth is negotiable if the check is big enough." A few gasps, then applause. Hesitant at first, then bolder. This wasn't just a disruption, it was a collision. The curated image of a smiling shepherd was cracking, and in its place stood a man caught between his brand and the gospel he claimed to serve. Kenneth finally responded, voice low but stern, "I won't be disrespected bit in my own church." Joel nodded, then stopped selling it like it's yours. Boom! A camera zoomed in. The live stream, previously broadcasting hymns and smiling testimonials, was now catching an unscripted confrontation. Online viewers watching from across the country began flooding the chat. "Who is he? Is that Joel Osteen? He just called out Kenneth on his own stage on X, formerly Twitter." The clip began to circulate within minutes. American pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen just exposed television preacher Kenneth Copeland in his house. Unreal. This isn't church. This is corporate religion. He's saying what everyone's been afraid to. Inside Lakewood, a church volunteer approached him nervously. "Sir, we'd like you to step outside." Joel looked around at the cameras, the lights, the crowd. Why did the gospel get uncomfortable? The volunteer paused. We don't want division. Joel raised his voice just enough to reach the back rows. Truth doesn't divide. It reveals this wasn't a political rally. It wasn't a debate stage. It was a cathedral of convenience that had finally been confronted with conviction. And Joel had only begun. Outside the church, the Houston humidity pressed down heavy. Reporters were already gathering, some tipped off by watchers of the viral live stream, others just following the trending hashtags. Joel stepped into the media circle with the same poise he had inside. No bodyguards, no PR handler, just his voice, and it was already echoing across the country. A CNN stringer leaned in with a smirk. "You think calling out television preacher Kenneth Copeland in his own church makes you look righteous?" Joel fired back. "I didn't go there to look righteous. I went there because millions of Americans have been lied to by people who hide behind pulpits while they count donation envelopes." Boom! That clip alone racked up 2 million views before the sun set. Back inside, television preacher Kenneth Copeland sat behind a tinted glass window in his office, watching the replay. His advisors circled, some panicked, some defiant. "We can control this," one said. "Blame it on him being a political agitator. Say he disrupted worship." Kenneth didn't answer right away. He was watching Joel again, this time as he answered a Fox News anchor in real time, still standing outside Lakewood. "The church should be a refuge for truth," Joel said. "But when truth becomes inconvenient, too many pastors become politicians." The anchor blinked. "Are you saying television preacher Kenneth Copeland is part of the political machine?" Joel didn't hesitate. "I'm saying if the gospel offends your business model, maybe you're not preaching the gospel." Kenneth shut the monitor off. Inside, the damage control machine began humming. A press release was drafted. An Instagram post went up with a smiling verse. But it was too late. The narrative was no longer in Kenneth's control. Meanwhile, TikTok users cut up the moment where Joel said, "You think truth is negotiable if the check is big enough," overlaying it with clips of Kenneth's mansion, his luxury car collection, his private jets. Young Christians began reposting. "This is the revival we actually need. Not a concert, not a TED Talk, truth." By sundown, American pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen had done something no political commentator, no Christian influencer, no investigative journalist had managed. He cracked the armor of a multi-million-dollar religious empire with just his voice. And the pressure hadn't even begun, because by that night, a flood of emails, whistleblowers, and ex-volunteers began pouring into his inbox. One subject line read, "We saw what you said. We've got receipts. Let's talk." The emails flooded in, some anonymous, others signed with trembling names and church IDs. A volunteer from the Kenneth Copeland Ministries music ministry sent scanned bank statements showing forced donations deducted from paychecks. A janitor wrote in broken English, "He told us, 'God bless rich, that's why we know, ask question.'" Even a former staffer came forward with a Dropbox link labeled tithes for Jet's internal ledger. Joel stared at his laptop. His hand hovered above the mouse, hesitating. This wasn't just about one televised clash anymore. It was about the machinery behind the curtain, the silent system that turns Sunday sermons into multi-million-dollar brands. This wasn't a scandal. It was an empire built on guilt. He forwarded the files to his legal team, marked them for secure storage, then hit record. His video went live in less than 30 minutes. He didn't wear makeup, no studio lights, just a desk lamp and the words. "To every believer who ever wondered where their offering went, this is for you." Within hours, the internet exploded. Hashtags flared like wildfires. Neshbor prosperity pulpit, Handauer Copeland exposed, #tithes Ruth. And then it happened. A letter from Kenneth's attorney was delivered to Joel's inbox with the subject line, "Cease and desist defamation notice." He laughed out loud. "Defamation," he muttered, then held the letter up to the camera on a live stream. Funny how the truth is only dangerous when it cuts too close to the checkbook. The live stream peaked at 1.2 million concurrent viewers, beating even some primetime cable ratings. Some viewers were outraged, but others, quietly, slowly, were starting to ask the same question Joel had asked on that church stage. If the gospel is free, why do they sell it like it's gold? Television preacher Kenneth Copeland hadn't responded yet, not directly. But behind the scenes, Kenneth Copeland Ministries hired a crisis PR firm known for handling political figures and celebrities during breakdowns. And still the DMs kept coming. One voice message played with a shaky whisper. If you go deeper, you'll find the board knows. They all know, but no one speaks because everyone's paid. Joel listened, then he stood up. This isn't over, he said into the void. It wasn't. While Joel's video circled the globe like wildfire, television preacher Kenneth Copeland stayed quiet. No tweets, no Sunday comments, no press conference. But behind the scenes, he wasn't idle. Kenneth Copeland Ministries legal counsel filed a request for temporary injunction. The goal, mute Joel before Sunday. His next appearance would coincide with the church's anniversary broadcast, an event that typically brought in millions in donations. Joel, meanwhile, was already prepping his next move. He knew the game. They weren't trying to prove him wrong. They were trying to silence him long enough for the news cycle to roll on. But this time, it wasn't working. Every attempt to smear him only brought more attention to the evidence he'd shared. A Fox affiliate reporter caught up with him outside Capitol Hill. Joel, are you concerned you'll be sued for libel? He didn't flinch. Truth isn't libel, he said, holding up a manila folder. But if they want to go to court, I'll bring the offering envelopes too. Behind him, someone whispered, he's really doing it. Inside the envelope were statements, testimonies, donor complaints, and a now viral spreadsheet listing Kenneth Copeland Ministries' executive bonuses cross-referenced with donation spikes. And one tab at the bottom, jet fuel reimbursements. Joel wasn't bluffing. He'd even booked a segment on 60 Minutes, not to attack faith, but to protect it. That was the difference. He wasn't trying to burn the church down. He was pulling back the velvet curtain and asking the simplest question. Where is the line between ministry and marketing? The day before his national interview aired, Kenneth's team blinked. Kenneth Copeland Ministries issued a statement, not from Kenneth himself, but from an unnamed board member. It read, "We remain committed to spreading the gospel and regret any confusion or concern caused by inaccurate portrayals." Joel read it live on his feed. He looked directly into the camera and said, "They didn't deny the jets. They didn't deny the bonuses. They didn't deny anything. All they said was, 'Sorry you're upset. That's not faith, that's a sales script.'" The clip went nuclear. Even mainstream outlets, once skeptical, started asking questions. Was this the turning point? He hadn't just stepped onto the national stage. He was owning it. Sunday morning, Kenneth Copeland Ministries' sanctuary brimmed with thousands, their hands raised to the rafters. Television preacher Kenneth Copeland took the stage to thunderous applause, but something was different. The smiles were tighter, the cheers shorter. Even among his most loyal, doubt had crept in. And backstage, American pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen wasn't watching on TV. He was there, not inside Kenneth Copeland Ministries, but outside the massive arena, standing beside a mobile stage with an American flag and a simple wooden cross behind him. No lights, no teleprompter, just his voice. Dozens had gathered, then hundreds, then thousands more. Some came curious, others came convicted, but most came for the same reason. They'd seen too many headlines, too many empty apologies, too many men in suits preaching sacrifice from private jets. Joel stepped up to the microphone and said, "I'm not here to tear down faith. I'm here to remind you what faith looks like when it doesn't come with a price tag." Behind him, screens replayed Kenneth's private jet photos, cuts from old sermons where he promised wealth, and clips of Joel quoting Matthew 21:12. Jesus entered the temple and drove out all who were buying and selling there. The crowd stirred. A few Kenneth defenders tried to heckle. One shouted, "He brings people to God. What have you done?" Joel didn't blink. "I don't ask for jets. I don't ask for donations. I ask for accountability." He raised a binder labeled Faith, Not Fortune. A collection of whistleblower reports, former employees, even ex-congregants who felt duped. Inside Kenneth Copeland Ministries, Kenneth's team scrambled. Word reached him mid-sermon. He's outside. He brought a crowd and the press is with him. Kenneth smiled tightly and pivoted his message. "We don't respond to attacks. We focus on hope, positivity, prosperity." But outside, Joel's voice carried over speakers and live streams. Hope without truth is just marketing. And just like that, the split was undeniable. It wasn't believer versus atheist. It was truth versus polish, gospel versus brand. By nightfall, #not for sale trended globally. Clips of Joel's speech spread through TikTok and X. Even mainstream pastors weighed in, some defending Kenneth, others siding with Joel. The question wasn't whether he'd made an impact, it was how far the shockwaves would travel next. By Monday morning, American pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen's stand outside Kenneth Copeland Ministries had ignited a national reckoning. Major networks picked it up. Conservative radio praised his courage. Left-leaning outlets couldn't ignore the storm either. But the real shock came when pastors, big names with millions of followers, started to pick sides. One clip from the live stream exploded online. "Preaching isn't performance," Joel said into the mic steady and clear. "It's not about being liked. It's about telling the truth, even when it costs you something." Then came the gut punch. If Jesus flipped tables in the temple, why are we afraid to flip a few in Houston? That line echoed through cable news X and TikTok reels. Even atheist influencers started stitching his video with captions like, "Didn't expect to agree with American pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen today." Meanwhile, television preacher Kenneth Copeland's PR team was working overtime. He released a pre-recorded message 2 days later. Not live, not from the pulpit. He spoke from a manicured office framed by soft lighting and a copy of The Laws of Prosperity prominently placed behind him. "We believe in uplifting people that includes critics. We won't be drawn into division. We stand on love." But behind the scenes, Kenneth Copeland Ministries insiders leaked emails. The headlines wrote themselves. Kenneth Copeland Ministries internal memo. Kenneth's team tries to discredit Joel. He's playing politics with the pulpit. Kenneth Copeland Ministries donors nervous as Kenneth Copeland Ministries faces IRS questions over lavish spending. That's when Joel struck again. He posted a follow-up video, not from a studio, not with a script, just him in front of a plain wooden church in rural Texas. You can't discredit someone who isn't selling anything. "I'm not after your audience, Kenneth. I'm after the truth." He held up a manila envelope labeled IRS Form 13929, the official complaint for religious organization abuse. If your gospel leads to a mansion, a yacht, and a designer wardrobe, it might not be the one Jesus preached. The video passed 10 million views in 12 hours. And just like that, the power balance shifted. Kenneth's silence became suspect. Joel's voice became unshakable. The next Sunday, he wasn't outside Kenneth Copeland Ministries anymore. He was invited to speak inside a dozen smaller churches that had once modeled themselves after Kenneth's. America was watching. The faithful were listening. And Joel wasn't done yet. By the end of that week, the American church landscape wasn't just stirred, it was fractured. American pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen's videos had become Sunday school conversation starters. Bible study groups were debating not doctrine, but dollars. And pastors who once looked up to television preacher Kenneth Copeland were now fielding emails from their own congregants asking tough questions. Do we tithe to build the kingdom or to keep someone's mansion cleaned and guarded? But the turning point came at the National Faith and Leadership Conference in Dallas. Television preacher Kenneth Copeland was set to headline. The event had been in planning for a year. Big sponsors, big production, national Christian media in attendance. Yet a week before the event, a petition circulated online. Disinvite prosperity preachers. It got 150,000 signatures in 2 days. At the center of the movement, one name, American pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen. The organizers didn't disinvite Kenneth, but they did extend a last-minute offer to Joel to join a panel titled "The Role of Conviction in a Celebrity Church Age." He accepted, and when he walked on stage, the crowd was split. Some cheered, some stayed stone-faced. Kenneth, seated just 2 chairs down from him, gave a soft, rehearsed smile. The moderator opened with a tame question, but Joel bypassed the politeness. "It's not complicated," he said, scanning the audience. "If your platform gets bigger while the gospel gets smaller, you're not building a ministry, you're building a brand." Kenneth's face didn't flinch, but his hands shifted slightly in his lap. Then Joel turned to him directly. "I'm not your enemy, television preacher. But if no one in your life is allowed to ask you hard questions, you've stopped pastoring and started performing." Silence. No one interrupted. Even the moderator let it breathe. Joel leaned in. "The gospel isn't for sale, but too many pulpits are." The crowd was no longer divided. A ripple of applause started slowly, then spread like fire. Even some of Kenneth's longtime followers in the front row were clapping. That moment went viral again. Clips with captions like, "He just said what every churchgoer has felt." American pastor, television preacher, And businessman Joel Osteen just called out the system to its face. It wasn't about left or right anymore. It was about real versus fake. And for the first time in a long time, truth didn't come with a donation link. The panel ended, but the flood had just begun. Within 24 hours, Joel's 5-minute clip had been posted by thousands of churchgoers, ex-members, pastors, and even disillusioned seminary students. The hashtags exploded. Already gospel not brand and truth in the temple. Joel called it conservative networks who usually tiptoed around megachurches. They aired at progressive platforms who dismissed Joel for his politics. They reposted it with captions like, "Finally someone on the right saying what matters." Even people who'd never heard his name before were now watching him take a breath and say, "The gospel isn't for sale, and we're done pretending it is." Television preacher Kenneth Copeland stayed silent 4 days. Then one Thursday morning, his team released a 5-paragraph statement. It didn't name Joel, but it said attacks on church leaders were harmful to the body of Christ and motivated by division. That backfired instantly. Joel didn't wait 24 hours. He went live from a plain room with no fancy lighting, just him, a Bible, and the camera. If asking questions is now considered an attack, what does that say about the answers you don't want to give? He held up the Bible. This isn't a revenue stream, it's a rescue plan. And if that offends you, you're probably not preaching it. The stream shattered records. Churches that had once hosted Kenneth were now contacting Joel. Small-town pastors emailed him. Ministries asked him to speak, not about politics, but about conviction. And that Sunday, for the first time in years, Kenneth's church had empty seats. What was once considered untouchable had been touched not by scandal, not by rumor, but by truth. And one man who wasn't afraid to speak it, even if it meant standing alone. But he wasn't alone anymore. He had millions listening, and they weren't clapping for a show. They were standing for a shift. That Sunday evening, as the sun dipped behind the low-slung hills of Texas, American pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen stood before a modest congregation in a town few reporters could find on a map. No stage, no lights, no teleprompter, just folding chairs, hymnals cracked at the spine, and voices raw from singing with no choir mics to carry them. He hadn't planned to speak, but someone had recognized him, and someone else whispered, "Will you say something?" He took a breath, walked to the front. No cameras, no headlines. And then he said, "They told me the church was a building. They told me it was a brand, but I found it's a body, and every time one of us stands, it gets stronger." An old man wept. A mother stood with her child. A teenager looked up from his phone. Joel continued, "I didn't come to sell you something. I came to remind you the truth isn't behind a curtain or inside a contract. The gospel doesn't come with strings. It comes with scars and freedom. Silence, then applause. Not the clapping kind, the kind that lives in the soul. The quiet agreement that we've waited long enough." He didn't ask for donations, didn't sign books. He just left behind one line scratched into the back of a church bulletin someone handed him. "Don't sell what was already paid for." The bulletin ended up online. It spread like wildfire. And suddenly people started saying, "He's not a politician. He's not a pundit. He's a voice." And the voice didn't echo a brand. It echoed truth. And in an era where faith had become fashionable, he reminded a nation, the gospel isn't for sale. It's not scripted, not licensed, not monetized. It's carried by those brave enough to say so, even if it means standing in the fire alone. But Joel wasn't alone anymore. He had lit the match, and the whole world had seen the flame. As Joel stepped away from the final podium, the lights dimmed and the noise of the crowd softened to a hum, not of silence, but of reflection. Cameras stopped rolling. Analysts fell quiet. And for the first time all day, it was still. He turned toward the back of the stage, took one last glance at the room he had just shaken, and spoke not to a microphone, not to a lens, but to the people. You don't need a title to tell the truth. You don't need permission to speak up. And you sure don't need to bow just because someone says they hold power. He paused, eyes sharp, his voice steady. "I didn't walk into this room to win a handshake. I came to draw a line between what's real and what's rehearsed, between the gospel and the glitter, between truth and performance." Joel turned to the flag in the corner of the auditorium. No one noticed it before, but now every eye followed. This country was never built by celebrities. It was built by courage, by people who weren't invited to the table but flipped it anyway. He smiled, not out of pride, but conviction. This wasn't about me. It was about the message, and that message doesn't belong to me. It belongs to you. He stepped down. And with that, Joel walked into the crowd, not above them, not apart, but among them, because he didn't come to be worshipped. He came to remind them the truth never needed a pulpit. It just needed a voice.